First thing we're going to do on the sleeve is create a placket. So like this. So you're going to create a left and right placket with a point at the base. This one's a little bit bigger than the one we're going to create, but just showing you as a sample. So I've made a little template here, and the opening is 1.5 centimeters, and the top of the placket, this larger piece, is 1.5 centimeters, and on the other side it's 1 centimeter, the underneath bit. That makes it easier when you come to stitch down, that the underneath one doesn't get in the way of the top one when you're stitching it down. If you get your fabric, I'm going to cut out 2 of these. So I folded it in half. I'm going to place it on here, and I want to cut out around the perimeter of my template, so like this. I've marked in very light pencil on this one so you can see. I don't know if you can see that properly. But I don't, in actual fact, want to do that on the placket itself for the bodice because the pencil marks could show through. So I just want to mark with my pencil. I'm just going to do it on a single side so I can see better. So you can see through it. I'm just going to mark the points, the corners, the pencil dot. And I'm going to mark the corners of where the dotted line is on the template. That's going to be the cut opening. So I'm going to mark all of the points. So I can very lightly trace that with pencil, just barely. And I'm going to just do outside the perimeter as well. Make sure you grain straight on your fabric you're using for your placket. And don't shift your fabric. So I can just see the outer lines and the cut line where I'm going to cut. If you want to mark that cut one, you can as well, because it's just going to get cut open. You won't see that one. So there you go. So I'm going to fold them back. So I've got 2. And I'm going to cut them together. This will make a left and a right. You can pin them together if you want. If you're not 100% sure of where your iron lines are going to be, you can just put a dot at either end, and then that way you know exactly where to iron your pieces. So just lightly so you can see it. And then turn it around and transfer that information to the other side. So you can see it. I can see through that, you probably can't on the video. so I know where my lines are. And I can just see my iron dots. So I can draw on this side as well. So there, my two plackets. If you look at the placket, these plackets, you're going to sew them on the inside of your sleeve opening. And the longer side of it, the 12 centimeter side on your little template, if you're on the inside of it and it's going to the right, will create the left placket, and vice versa on the other side. So the longer side, when you turn it over, this long side is to the left. It creates a right side placket on your sleeves. So mark them out and get them ready, and then prep your sleeve. So I position my placket over my opening. I've just penciled it in so you can see it better on my sleeve. So this is the left side. And I've positioned my placket over top of it. And I'm just going to pin it in place. Use some fine pins at this point. It doesn't mark whatever you're using, if you're using silk especially. And then I'm going to come and machine up around the point and down. So I've machined round on a number 2 stitch, making sure that this is my seam allowance line, that is going to get caught in that line. So bring it down a little bit if it's not reaching this yellow carbon line. I don't think you can quite see it, but it's there. So you're going to cut up to that first line. And then you're going to cut into the corners. Just put the tip of your scissors, don't go like this, because if you go too far, you've ruined your whole sleeve. So just sharp scissors, clip right to the point. And then I'm going to go and press all these over along my, lining up my dots. You can finger press them, give you an idea. I'm lining up my little dots. Same on this side. So pre-iron it all. And then iron that little bit there forward. So these are all ironed, all the creases. and then turn it to the outside. And then you just gotta push your seam allowance towards the center of the placket and fold the other side over. That's one side. You need to flatten this out here with the iron and then bring this side so it overlaps the smaller side. And you're like that. So this will open with the larger side towards the narrower side. So that was with and then what you do with this top end is fold it over to right across the corner like that. Make sure there's nothing peeping out. And then again the same on the other side. Fold it right to the other side. And you'll get a nice short little house, sort of roof of a house. And do it on the iron. And then you top stitch down here, top stitch down here, and around the house. Where this is folded back, if you pop a pin as a guideline, just up from where that's ironed back there, so just pop a pin there, and then when you sew around the house, you stop at the pin and stitch right across. So you come up, around the house, down, and across. This way, across, up around the little house, and up the left. It's opening, the larger side is opening towards the narrower side of the sleeve. Yeah, so now the next part we're going to do, I'm going to sew up the seam. So looking at my seam allowance, on the right side, put the right sides together, pin them, and I'm going to stitch, this is my seam allowance here, I don't know if you can see it, about 1/2 centimetre, maybe a bit less. I'm going to stitch up on the outside. So I'm going to create a French seam. So first we stitch it towards the front side of the sleeve, and then I'll press it and bring it to the inside and stitch it again on the actual seam allowance line. So I've machined with a number 2 stitch. I've positioned my foot in the center of the seam allowance, just slightly closer to the inside of the seam allowance, and now I'm going to trim this away. So I'm cutting it quite close. Now I'm going to bring it inside, I'm going to press it. So this is pressed, and then now I've got it to the inside, turned inside out. So you can just see, I don't know if you can see that, my carbon line, the yellow. And if you look at, you can see the shadow of the seam allowance, so it needs to be short of the carbon line so it doesn't peep out the front. So I'm going to come and machine that now and then bring it back to the front. It's finished. So you get a small seam allowance there. So if you would have overlocked that, you would have seen a big wide overlock and shown through the fabric because it's quite flimsy and see-through. And for delicate fabrics, silks, stuff like that, French seam is a really good way of finishing it off. So it's completely finished off. It's not going to fray anywhere. So, and the secondary stitch, you don't want any threads peeping out here. So you've got to make sure that the seam allowance is completely encased in that little finished stitch there. So that's your French seam. Next, we're going to gather around the wrist and then we'll attach the cuff. So around the cuff now, the placket's done. I want to gather the cuff. So I've done 2 lines of stitching on the largest stitch on my machine, which is number 5. I haven't locked the front or the end. So I've stitched just slightly inside the seam allowance and then a foot's width away towards the edge of the seam allowance. So I've done them parallel to each other all the way around. Now I'm going to take the underneath thread and I'm going to gather. So I'm going to distribute that gather evenly around. My cuff. Until I'm happy with it. Now I'm ready to attach my cuff. So the cuff, I've cut the 2 cuffs out. I've cut the interfacing just the size of the pattern piece. So you don't want it going into the seam allowance. And then I pressed it lightly in half. And then I've turned one edge back up. So this will be the edge that will be at the inside of the cuff and get slip stitched down. So I'm just pre-placing it. So I'm going to machine stitch down the sides and then bag it out, and it's ready to attach to the cuff. So here it is, stitched either end. So I'm going to snip the corners off here. And then bag them out. You can use something, be careful, you can use something sharp to push the corners out. Not too sharp, don't push too hard because you might poke right through. Or you can use a little thread to stitch in the corner and pull it out. Right, I'm going to go press that again and it's ready to attach to the cuff. So here it's ironed. So with it being folded up there, that will become the inside part of the cuff. So that can be slip stitched down. And this longer side is the one that you'll machine. Now I can start pinning it in place. So you can see my green stitch, the first stitch. So I just want that slightly inside of my, you can see my yellow carbon paper line there, it's just there. So I'm just making sure that stitch line is within the raw edge. So I'll pin it in place. So I'm going to pin the two ends first. Make sure they're open. And then I'll just distribute this evenly until I'm happy with it and pin the rest in place. And then I will come along and machine along there. So there it is, all pinned in place, and I'm going to go and machine now. So I'll machine just on the yellow carbon paper line there. So I've machined along there, take my pins out. And then I can pop all of this up inside. And then I can slip stitch down and I can pull the gathering threads out. So I just slip stitch along there. So I've transferred all my pins from the outside to the inside, and I'm doing a running stitch in a different colored thread from what color thread you're using to sew the armhole in, so you can differentiate between the two. So I'm just doing a running stitch around, so my sleeve is inside, so I'm bringing the head of the sleeve and rolling it around. And just doing a running stitch just inside of the seam allowance line. So I've started from under the arm, slightly forward of the underarm seam. I've worked my way around, and now I've come back and I'm going to start filling in them gaps. So I'm going to go around again, still rolling my sleeve head around, and this will take up the ease. So you should get a continue stitch, a bit like a machine stitch. So just going in the opposite way now, taking up all the gaps. And then check it. If you're happy with it, the position of it, then you can go ahead and machine it. It's a good idea if you do both sleeves, tack them in first, check them against each other, make sure you're happy with the position of the two, and then machine, because you don't want to machine one, go on to the other and find out the one you've just machined is slightly off. So tack them both in first and then decide if you're happy with them. So I've machined from here all the way around and cross them back over. So you've got two bits crossing over underneath the arm, which tends to be a weak point, so it double stitches there and secures it better. So what I need to do now is take out my tacking stitches. We're going to add bias binding to encase the seam allowance under the arm, as an overlock won't look nice. So we're going to do a small bias binding around the arm. So here's the bias binding I've just added. I've just took a 1/2 inch bias binding, or you could make your own bias binding if you've got any of your fabric left, would be nicer. I've just folded it in half, laid it on, and top stitched it through the two. So it gives you a nice finish. So on the inside, on the outside you don't see. It looks nice. Next. So next thing we're going to do is the hem. So what I've done first on my carbon line at the bottom of the facings, I've stitched across the bottom on the carbon line, so on both sides. I'm just going to trim the corner off and I can bug it out. Then poke that out. Be very careful when you poke it out. And then my hem just kind of follows on from that. So I've just turned it up on the carbon line and then turned it in. So I'm keeping a very narrow hem on here. What you want to do at the beginning of it is just inside here, because your seam allowance is straight here. I've just turned it in a little bit part way. Just turned it in part way and started turning it in. Further up inside there, so got a nice little turn. I've just finger pressed it all, pinned it in place, so I've done it all the way along. Done the same on the other side, bagged it out. And then I'm just going to come and top stitch with the machine stitch. And then the next thing after that will be doing your buttonholes up the center front.